Hello and most welcome to 1185 of the Heidegger series. And today we're going to speak about an article written by Elena Bartolini of the University of Milan. It is very interesting because she compares Heidegger's ontology to systems, and I think that is also always a good approach to put something into so one can compare. It is by having something and then comparing that we come to an understanding, and that understanding is from Heidegger himself. So why not listen to him and do as he says? I'll just go through the abstract first. Systems thought is essentially based on recognizing the existence of structural relations. But from the philosophical point of view, there are no accounts about this particular and specific topic. In my paper, I'd like to present a proposal focused on some elements from Heidegger's ontology in comparison with a systemic one. In order to provide some contents for this issue, I'm especially focusing on the interconnection between the Greek and Aristotelian terms physis, logos, and on, conceived within the Heideggerian interpretation, to display how incompleteness and openness are required for the development of a systemic ontology, with even important consequences in a systemic approach to the human being. Since his first appearance on the scientific scenery, systems thought brought within its considerations an implicit ontology, essentially based on relations, structure, and unity. In his 1968 work, von Bertalanffy defined systems as sets of elements standing in interactions. Nevertheless, while describing which are the aims of a general system theory and proposing some possible progresses, he does not focus on the implications of such ontological assumptions. Most recently, the research group on system thought at the Catholic University in Milan has provided many suggestions on a metaphysical reflection as well as some ontological explanations about systems. However, few are the inquiries specifically addressed to the importance of those structured relations that are ontologically constitutive of system. Moreover, neither the definition of relation, especially structured relations, is object of clarification, even though its pivotal role in such thought. The principal aim of the present paper is to discuss these points, comparing a systemic ontology with some Greek terms assumed through Heidegger's interpretation. In such a proposal, incompleteness will be motivated as a constitutive element of this particular ontological perspective. According to its etymology, ontology is preliminary a study of what is. It focuses on what indicated while affirming that there is something, that something is. It's the on we're looking for here. Even though the employment of this term is quite recent, usually it is through ontology that some philosophical concepts from ancient philosophy are investigated for further developments. However, Heidegger warns about the risk of an ontology led in a traditional way. In Introduction to Metaphysics, he claims, cite, "The term ontology designates the development of the traditional doctrine of being into a philosophical discipline and a branch of the philosophical system. But the traditional doctrine is the academic analysis and ordering of what for Plato and Aristotle and again for Kant was a question. Though to be sure, a question that was no longer originary. In this case, ontology means the effort to put being into words, and to do so by passing through the question of how it stands with being, not just with beings as such. Even though he highlights which could be the negative side of traditional ontology, he confirms the possibility of a new one really attentive to being and not only to beings. How happened instead in the history of Western metaphysics? According to his perspective, in the same context, Heidegger follows. We ask the question, how does it stand with being? What is the meaning of being? Not in order to compose an ontology in the traditional style. The point is to restore the historical Dasein of human beings, and this also always means our almost future Dasein in the whole of the history that is allotted to us. Back to the power of being that is to be opened up originally. not only a different ontology is desirable, but it should also consider the historical Dasein, which is not assumed in its past, but rather in its present as a pivotal intersection between what was and the possibility of what could be. It is crucial to notice that here Heidegger presents a connection among Dasein, being, and its originary openness. Considering the challenge to think a new ontology. How should it be? Shall we conceive it as a wholly knowable and determinable? In other words, the new ontology needed to describe reality in its shades shall be considered a complete one or not. The term complete derives from the Latin completus, past participle of complere, meaning to fill up, then employed to indicate fulfill, finish a task. Something complete is something accomplished. Thus, what tends to a satisfaction, to a balanced state. When something is complete, is more understandable, since its constitutive elements are stable, entirely defined. Being confined, what is complete is somehow closed. In systems ontology, is systems ontology a complete ontology? In Metaphysics, page 7, Aristotle, who in this book discusses ousia, intended as the main connotation of being, states, but then there is what is composed of something in such a way that the whole is one, in the manner not of a heap, but of a syllable. And the syllable is not the letters, nor are B plus A the same as the syllable BA. Therefore, there is something that is the syllable, not only the letters, the vowel, and the consonant, but also something else. This claim has been usually adopted in comparison with the statement of Anderson, Nobel Prize winner 1977, who attested, more is different. Very succinct. Both these quotes aim to highlight the impossibility to find in the components those linear consequences of what is. Hence, what is deducible, combined with the previous considerations about ontology, is that a systemic ontology cannot be only attentive to the single being, to any kind of item present in front of us, but rather should consider the multiple levels through which reality presents itself, namely the hierarchical structure of it. Thus, given the central role of structure relations, it seems possible to affirm that systems are based on a certain kind of relational ontology. Is there in the history of philosophy a concept that describes structures, relations, and the dynamics? Greek thought names it logos. In this sense, Bateson speaks about the pattern which connects. And following his reasoning, Barachhi suggests a sort of continuity from the concept of system, systema, to that of logos. The first one indicates something connected with itself and cohesive. Systems result to be characterized by an excess due to the existence of internal and mutual relations among its parts. Thus, it guarantees to the system a dynamic through the presence of states and provides account for the possible complexity of its behavior. Whereas the second term is usually translated as discourse, sentence, or reason, but its origin refers to the verb legein, meaning a connection that protects and preserves, linking, gathering, articulating, so as to hold the differing together while saving it as such a differing. Consequently, Barachhi concludes logos bespeaks relation, correlation, a fitting together from which arise configurations of meaning, a union that literally makes sense, brings sense forth, and lets it be illuminated. Since these considerations, she underlines a similarity between organisms, i.e., living systems, with discourse and reason. Listen to Barachhi. This generative arrangement, which is the bearer and the locus of sense, equally defines linguistic articulation, the work of rationality, and the organized structures, whether internal or external, whether visible or invisible, of life. Hence, structured relationships, ordered and organized, are essential to life itself. Elsewhere, Barachhi concisely states, bestowing order means giving life. The world surrounding us presents itself in a way that the hanging together of the world is a matter of communing and communications. The world conveys itself to itself, speaks to itself as it were, pervaded by the ripples of information at once, informing and transforming it. It seems that the specific way in which what is reaches our senses, our same way to be too, is characterized by relations, namely structures and movement, namely dynamic changing. The two instances are both a connotation of the Greek term logos, which demonstrates to be the ordered appearance of being, the informed way. More clearly, it is precisely in this pulsating and rippling motility that the world emerges as the body of all, one and choral, the fabric of unitary yet vibrant becoming, above all alive. Minati, trying to explain the appearance of independent organisms from the physical point of view, clarifies that such event is possible thanks to what he calls the rupture of symmetry. Considering all auto-organized phenomena as a consequence of the quantum phenomenon of symmetry breaking, the symmetry discussed here is the one related to those equations describing the dynamic of the system. When the symmetry is spontaneously broken, what is observable is that the state of the system presents a certain kind of order. The same concept of information is here pivotal because, as recalled by Vitiello, to the order is associated a higher degree of information, which is not present in the case of a symmetrical configuration. In systems thought, information is not conceived as a simple message, but rather the element that literally informs. It is to say, that allows the emergence of a new structure. If, thanks to a new information, the symmetry is broken, the position of every element is not exchangeable. Its same place is significative for the order of the system. It is crucial to distinguish it from the others. So let me clarify that point a bit here. I'm going to write it this way. This is a system, stable, assume that one thing is changing, become different, or at another place. The rest of the system remains. Compare this to when one thing changes, all of the other things change. Every little atom, positron, neutron in the whole universe. Very aptly put. Its same place is significative for the order of the system. It is crucial to distinguish it from the others. But if such a happening is possible, thus signifies that there should be the possibility for unpredicted configurations. It is to say, there should be the possibility of actualizing new potentialities. Physis is the Greek word indicating the event of standing forth, arising from the concealed, and thus enabling the concealed to take its stand for the first time. According to the translation proposed by Heidegger, this Greek term refers to the force through which beings become observable. Taken from the concealing. In the basic concepts of Aristotelian philosophy, Heidegger exhorts to consider physis, on, as a being that is what it is, from out of itself on the basis of its genuine possibilities. The break of the symmetry through the introduction of information has as consequences order and life, logos. Only starting from an incomplete ontology in which there is no given order yet, such emerging is possible. Only where there is power, it is to say no closure or completeness, boundaries can be traced, order can be established, life could be. But at the same time, once instituted, this order persists. Thesis and logos, renewing and maintenance. Logos is the here and now gathered display of thesis. Thesis is that unpredicted source for beings, appearances. Both are sides of what is, aspects of being. Effectively, since its etymology, one of the ways in which logos can be intended is meaning to make manifest, to allow to appear. In this sense, it can only be understood if its essential relation to thesis is borne in mind. More clearly, the power which emerges from concealment must be gathered together, one. In this sense, logos discourse is founded on logos being. That is, making manifest something into our human verbal or corporal expression is due to the previous existence of such dynamical displaying of the thesis into logos, conceived as the ordered but unpredictable interrelation surrounding us. Hence, the language, not only in the specific connotation of speech, but also in its wider meaning, is possible because man, defined as zoon logos echon, zoon logos echon, is the one capable to observe worldly interrelations and is able to interfere with them, changing the constraints or creating new ones. Therefore, as attested by Barachhi, in its more basic sense, well exceeding the exercise of human calculative capacities, rationality is relationality, the meaningful bonding that discloses aspects inaccessible through the examination on unrelated components. Logos is not only reason, if with it what is intended is a definite, predictable knowledge. It is rather the mediation, the ratio as proportio of the multiple and various appearances of being. From the assumption of such an ontology, I choose two terms to indicate the main consequences for the interpretation of the human in this sense, inspired by the work of Barachhi and Urbani Olivi, Architecture and Unicity. If systems ontology is not closed in a sort of completeness, it means that through his own agency and freedom, namely his ethos, the human builds his own being, becoming a unique individual. Specifically addressed to the importance of these structured relations that are ontologically constitutive of systems. Moreover, neither the definition of relation, especially structured relation, is object of clarification. Even though its pivotal role in such thought. The principal aim of the present paper is to discuss this point, comparing a systemic ontology with some Greek terms assumed from Heidegger's interpretation. And these are those. So we have two different systems, or we have one system and the existence. And the point is, in this system, one thing can be removed, it could be moved, it could be changed, but nothing in the rest of the system changes. It remains dormant, static. And therefore, the qualities of both the one that is changed or moved remain in its new form, and more interestingly, everything else in the system remains unchanged. And this is looking at beings rather than being. And it's interesting, from a systemic point of view, this becomes even clearer. This could be compared to the view of Leibniz, where everything, the monads, are dependent on every outer relation. If you remember, the monads do not have windows. You can't look into them. Apparently, this one could be looked into, and this one. They seem to have their qualities by themselves. This is definitely the thesis. This is the establishment of a staticness that needs to be investigated. It is not enough barely to say it's static. Its behavior is in a very specific way. And this is parallel to another Italian, namely Carlo Rovelli, and his relational quantum mechanics that flies in the eye of this idea of, as I just explained here, that one thing could be moved, and that thing is in itself in its due place, and everything else in the universe remains as it is. This is the ontic mood. Let me clarify that. So we have comparison here. Ontic versus ontologic. In the ontic, we have this: one could change only one thing or several, while the others are remaining. Ontological is seeing it as a whole. This is being. This is beings. So it's a very different relationship and complicated, and it is impossible. It should not be possible, even not at the beginning of trying to understand Heidegger, to have a misunderstanding at this level. I think that misunderstanding has to be there. It would be inhuman. It would actually be counterproductive not to have a misunderstanding, because that would mean that you haven't understood to the very bottom. Yes, that's very correct. If you directly understand the difference between ontic and ontological, then you missed it. This is a very small point, but very important, that Barachhi made and was so clearly explained by the author of the article. I will put a pause here and I will sort of contrast this to something else to further. So let's take this a notch higher. Let's continue this. I will bring into the action the Taurus topology. It can be seen as an expansion of the usual sphere. And here into the action we have the observer and the observed. Remember now what I said about the system. One thing could change, whereas all the other parts remain the same. And therefore, the qualities of the change thing and the other things can be defined in relation to each other, or the inert positioning, the localized positioning. And here we see sort of the genesis of logos, thesis, and the ontic mode. And this is still debatable according to Leibniz and many others. But the toroid function brings in the observer, and the observer is, according to all quantum mechanics, part of the universe, not only as seen from the outside as a point in the system, but from the inside. It is the observer, and the observer changes in the observation. It doesn't remain the same, and this is something that is clearly shown by the Taurus topology. There is always a change going on here. This is a sphere. Tried to depict here, I hoped it worked. and you see things entering into the sphere. The entrance into the sphere is the observer, and things become that way. It's a becoming between the observer and the observed. So the things are not the observed. Of course, they are not the observer either. It is in the process that existences or ontology comes forth. Very important to remember, the observer changes when it makes its observations. Not even that remains stable. And I would say the stability in the system, here depicted with ontic mood, and the thesis of the philosophers of nature and their archaea, is simply wrong or missing understanding. It is not sufficient to understand how things works. So I will continue with an article of Meijer. He writes about scientific discoveries and compares it to artistic development. And this is of course the thesis of Roger Penrose as well. This is from F.F. Meijer. Processes of science and art model as the holoflux of information using toroidal geometry. And he calls the torus, which this is 1, 2, it's a complex torus, an information integrator. And in the open core of the torus, that is, if spiraling information quanta enter the central structure here, many recent studies indicate that the toroidal structure allows the coupling of a whole spectrum of physical information carriers: photons, phonons, electrons, as well as a mixed forms of such wave particles, such as polaritons and polarons. Due to the convergent aspect of this torus circuitry, these oscillations are converted to standing waves or scalar waves, or may undergo condensation. The scalar wave is the wave that remains when two opposing electromagnetic waves interfere, cancelling out the electric and magnetic field components. The resulting component in the electromagnetic wave is the so-called soliton, a non-linear longitudinal wave vibrating in the same direction as it is traveling. Another integrating activity modeled by torus geometry is that it can simulate the generation of a special collection of waves that displays a similar vibration frequency called coherent wave packages. A special form of this is known as the Bose-Einstein conjugates. The latter have physically described only at very low temperatures. but more recently have been demonstrated to occur at much higher temperatures than assumed before. One example of this is the biological process of photosynthesis, but various other coherent cellular processes are described now in the field of quantum biology. The particular coherent wave structures have potential influences on the organization of cellular organelles and cell water. Crucial in this respect is the intrinsic symmetry of the torus, showing a diverging entropic half in which waves on the surface expand and another part with converging properties. That stands for information integration and compression. In cosmology, these two forces are defined as gravitational compression versus dark energy mediated expansion. Scientific endeavor contributes to the ongoing entropic generation of huge amounts of information, whereas converging integrative activities occur in our brain. In addition to publication, review, and internet spreading, such activities continuously compress information that by some is regarded as a physical metaphor called gravitational. Both processes have been projected in torus models and assume that entangled wave information that enters the inner geometry of the torus core can undergo potential non-destructive interferences and superposition. It is important to note that such mechanisms can play a role at any fractal scale of reality, including the initiation and the maintenance of life processes on our own planet. It was recently found that the spectrum of discrete EM frequencies that stabilizes life conditions may exhibit quantum ordering effects on life cells on the basis of the induction of geometric wave patterns. The candidate radiation mode consists of coupled phonon-photon and electron wave energies, as well as quantum oscillations at far infrared eigen frequencies, and were proposed to be communicative through a toroidal interference into scalar wave information. And the scalar wave is the one that decides on what scale these things are happening. The scalar wave is the informational processing that tells relational sizes, weights, masses, situations, forces, and so on. Scalar wave. It is a potential wave, and in some ways it's akin to the wave that we spoke about earlier, the quantum wave, the potential wave. The status of toroidal modeling in physics. A single torus can be considered basically as a surface of revolution generated by revolving a circle in a three-dimensional space about an axis coplanar with the circle. In this manner, in fact being a product of two circles. A torus consists of a central axis with a vortex in both ends. And a surrounding coherent field. Energy flows in one vortex through the central axis, out the other vortex, and then wraps around itself to return to the first incoming vortex. Topology is the science of form modulations. And of course, in a system like this one, the ontic system, that understanding is not present. It's even a Euclidean system. So this was the possible understanding for the pre-Socratic or the Greek or the coming after that, until the event of non-Euclidean geometry. It was not possible to go this. The torus is usually seen as the fundamental form of balanced energy flow found in sustainable systems at all scales. Rotations projected as information flow in trajectories on the surface of the torus can occur left and right-handed as well as outside, as well as in the central hole, indicating 3D geometry. The 4D modus of the torus is attained by an extra rotation while a 3D torus can be envisioned as a cycling circle. A 4D structure introduces a third cyclic element that rotates the torus inside out. So it's an interesting extra development here. As initiated by the internal negative curvature plane, like an alternate explosion when it goes out, and implosion. So we have a fourth element here. It expands out of itself and it implodes inside itself. And both these movements are happening simultaneously. And this, of course, adds a fourth dimension. It's very interesting, this, I might say. The torus, and this is initiated by the internal negative curvature planes, like an alternate explosion, implosion. You see here, like this, we get a movement coming from topology itself. The torus geometry has been extensively used in physics to model the topology and presumable internal structure of elementary particles, such as the photon, which is seen as the carrier of physical information with regard to wave-particle interactions, as well as in describing the structure of the electron. Wheeler and Feynman have earlier modeled electrons as spherical inward and outward electromagnetic waves. As mentioned above, besides electrons, also photons are considered to have toroidal geometries. Can't wait to the summary here. Various modalities of nested tori, the plural of torus, have been applied in geometric aspects of string theories, such as the superstring model called the type 2a theory, which postulates that the 6 extra space dimensions are compactified around a 6-dimensional torus or tori. These nested torus geometries include so-called twistors, proposed by Penrose as a mathematical means of defining building blocks of space-time, exhibiting a nested and vibrational structure. Twistors, as a special case of tori, possesses aspects of holonomy, entanglement, and enable an approach to quantum gravity without need for the many extra dimensions as usually required in string theory. Twistor mathematics enable to transform information in our local 3D space-time into geometric mathematical representation in a 4D setting that may underlie our daily reality, also called a spin liquid or amplitudehedron. And now we're going to put it into some sort of context. 2.3. Torus dynamics as a metaphor for scientific discovery. As mentioned earlier, the application of the toroidal geometry on the present work is primarily meant as a metaphoric approach in an attempt to model the complex endeavor of scientific discovery. This process can be viewed upon as an interactive stream of interacting scientific information, resulting in ideas, hypotheses, concepts, and theories. Yet, in order to fundamentally analyze this process, a wide spectrum of creative human activities have to be positioned in their underlying connections in a time-progressive mode. Such a metaphoric approach was earlier proposed to characterize the properties of so-called memes in the human brain by pointing to the strong resemblance with the various stages of viral infection. Indeed, meme concept has also been applied to the process of scientific discovery, in which interactors play a role by constantly changing information in the form of replicators. the latter are conceived as entities or units of information, tentatively called memes, due to the superficial resemblance to gene transmission, possessing a selective selection bias. These memes are conceived as transmitters of cultural information and are composed of scientific representations that form memeplexes as metaphor for scientific concepts and theories. Memes even have heritable aspects since they are often related to a whole lineage of preceding theories, and the ongoing adaptation is aimed at greater fitness, and survival time in the competitive field. They can, in seldom cases, even rise to the dominance of paradigm change. But it should be realized that theories, including their successors, are, per definition, incomplete and vulnerable, and often an absolute change or revolution is not at stake. If somehow associative or emotionally attractive memes infect either the unconscious or the conscious parts of the scientist's brain, they are subsequently replicated and transmitted to other individuals in an unchanged form or undergo a quantum-like superposition, so to spread out the scientific community as a mutated modality. Summarizing, there are distinct reasons to choose the higher dimensional and supersymmetric aspects of the so-called double vortex torus for outlining the scientific process instead of more simple circular process, or God forbid this one. One, the Taurus topology with its internal channel-like aspects, with various types of information carrying vehicles, allows the coupling of very different modalities of wave information, such as photons, phonons, electromagnetic energy field flow, mixed forms of these so-called polaritons and polarons, as well as acoustic and cinematographic data, thereby mimicking the large diversity of scientific information. Written reports, articles, reviews, books, videos like this one, internet data, etc., etc. Second, the torus appears to be a favored geometric structure in physics and is widely applied for description of elementary particles from the micro to the macro scale of the universe. 3. The torus model integrates the present time as resulting from the past and future wave projections. The very center of the torus is often described as a so-called singularity, in which the total information is compressed in unity and can function as a register of information on the brink between black hole and white hole structures, in which the present is indeed the result of memories of the past and projections of the future. In the total science process, it reflects its current states of affair as a virtual dynamic state resulting from a multitude of concept interactions and human experiences. The latter are ultimately instrumental in formulation of laws of nature, present and future technologies, and metaphysical visions of the intelligent species that habit our universe. The torus structure has self-referential properties and displays a recurrent flow of information that returns to its ever-growing dynamical self. The latter aspect being a defined feature of self-consciousness that in its turn is an essential property of scientific development. Fifth, the torus represents unity in diversity, a sort of protected piece of space-time within a configuration of various force fields that is also widely used in philosophical literature in metaphysical context. It was recently pointed out by Langan that intrinsically in the ongoing process of science endeavor, a metaphysical language will be created that finally should enable a global coupling of mind and physical reality in a language with sufficient expressive power to picture a comprehensive description of reality, or even a theory of everything. Such a higher order language should be able to explain itself, and thus the biological origin of mental activities of scientists in which minds it exists. This implies that the universe would share a linguistic structure, and dynamics of the theory provide a metaphysical language that can even take a mathematical format, and was called Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe, CTMU. Thus, just grab some. Thus, CTMU is a theory which says that reality is in fact a self-modeling universal language. Well, let's close to this. Langan proposed that in such a teleological causation, ordinary events are predicted on the generation of closed causal loops distributing over time and space. This loop structure will reflect the fact that time and spatial expansion of the cosmos as a function of time flow in both directions, forward and backward, as well as outward and inward, in a new kind of medium or manifold. This concept is very much in line with the present toroidal model approach, as depicted with the torus, and may reflect the ultimate integration of scientific and artistic endeavor. Three, art and music modeled by toroidal geometry. And here becomes very interesting. It echoes the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, because he makes a comparison with mathematics and music and the Gödelian vision or gestalt or body conception. It's this, definitely. It's a quite strong limitation, very strong limitation. Art and science, historically seen, has always been strongly connected, in the sense that both human activities attempt to expose and understand the complex structures and deep layers of nature, albeit with very different methodologies. Also, science often makes use of artistic representations, while contemporary art increasingly integrates science technological instrumentation. The history of art varied through time and from one culture to the other. Sculpture was, for example, considered a major art form in the Western world, whereas in ancient China it was first regarded as a product of manual labor out of the lower classes, but later as a holy way to describe the harmony in the world. The later being dominant in classical science in Greece and Arabian world, with the emphasis on geometry and mathematics. The appreciation for science and art is therefore largely dependent on the particular part of the world and the time frame we take into account. Several authors have paid attention to similarities, but also fundamental differences between science and art. In Table 2, which we'll come to soon, a tentative scheme is made to shortly list aspects of scientific versus artistic processes. Although such a list of commons and differences is colored by personal experience, time-dependent and bears all the intrinsic dangers of generalization. Brady 2000 see perception as the connecting principle of art and science. And perception is not knowledge about it, but rather an immediate knowing of or a direct grasp of the perceived object. In this subconscious recognition and intention, as well as finding an adequate metaphor to characterize the object, play an important role. He stipulates Goethe's remark, "We see only what we know," which is true. I have to add the Barachhi findings that if something slowly changes from something dimly lit or obscure to banana, the people watching the change will not be able to see the banana, even though it is completely depicted. A person walking into the room will, without any hesitation, recognize the banana. But whereas those that saw something from the beginning, let's call it reality, will not be able to see what is emerging. And this we know it is the absolute majority of people, taken from Hari Yuvari and others. We have shut off our perception, our cognition. So we are projecting things that are no longer there. We are not, and for good reasons, because they did not know about the toroid when they built this up. It is a necessary thing for the development in the Ionian philosophy of nature. Not, and remember that, not an avoidable thing. Could never ever been avoided. Because if they don't know about this, how could they? Do you understand? This development makes another thing possible. In the East, they never went so far as the philosophy of nature. They didn't become empiricists, which was, of course, incredibly bad from a technological perspective, but somehow it saved them from the staleness and the staticness. Today, we all assume this. No one on this Western hemisphere would say that if we move one thing, all the other things in the universe changes. No one. But in quantum mechanics, that is the foundational. And as you can see here, we also have the added component that the observer changes his consciousness. And as is explained here, the theory, the artistic expression will also change. So taking that as a starting point and understanding that, we can go further. But it's very, very important to have that established, that if we see something and we cognize that, that will be stuckedness immediately. Reality itself is a stuckedness, and it will block out the coming and going, the absencing and the appearance. This is Heideggerian quantum mechanics at its best. All ideas of observing the world, seeing it objectively, will not be shared. This is very important. The non-shared feature of reality is a new thing. It's pointed out by E. Gilchrist from his perspective of the left versus the right brain hemisphere, but is also pointed out from quantum mechanics. It cannot be shared. It needs to be shared, but it should not be founded on the sharedness, because that is what we have here already founded. But if we have this, we can share our reality, we can see the same thing, and we can exchange information about that. This is not possible today. But as I said earlier, a human being looking at something slowly changing will not see the end product, will not see the banana. Needs to be understood. We cannot do that, especially if we don't have the toroidal understanding, which is a bodily/mind understanding. So don't imagine you can see reality. It's been proven we cannot, because abscessing and appearing are the main principle in modern physics. This is where everything happens. However, science more often tends to integrate earlier established knowledge into novel theories, considering that any theory is basically incomplete it is realized that science is often a process of small steps in which most theories will be tested and then reformulated or adapted. Only generally accepted laws of nature have relatively long survival time, since they mostly rest on solid and validated concepts and are often supported by a mathematical basis. Table 2 lists some fundamental differences in science and art, although it should be realized that this comparison reflects a rather small time window, while in the era of digitalization and dominant internet information spreading, the interaction between art and science can potentially rapidly change. For example, architecture and decorative art took many concepts from science and technology, such as symmetry and biological order, and this was certainly the case for mathematics and geometric representations as a basis for advanced decorations and music. Bach. Even poetry can be presented in geometric forms, as in so-called concrete poetry. Famous mathematicians were often passionate musicians and sought to reformulate natural phenomena into a more refined and coherent language, while illustrating their concepts with complex masterpieces of art that even try to catch the feeling of extra dimension. The self-similar fractal picture of Escher represents an astounding example. While artists empirically discover the laws of color, current brain investigators study the emotions they produce and try to unravel the very nature of such qualia. Consciousness studies addresses the deeper levels of meditation. While painting was often a spiritual exercise to create a focus for meditation and dreaming. Also, the rhythmic patterns of rotational and counter-rotating elements as depicted in the present study, also in the relation to chaotic system versus deterministic causality, were popular subjects of art. Contemporary artists often maintain a strongly motivated rejection of the traditional formal logic of science, but interestingly seem to prefer utilizing quantum formats of reality and information, such as uncertainty and entanglement. Let me read a little from table 2 and compare. Science shows inspiration to inspire. Inspiration in art leads to material manifestations. Science tries to reveal deeper layers of nature. Artists' process provides portal to magical dimensions. Scientific process based on satisfying fundamental curiosity. Artistic tries to render the familiar unfamiliar. Scientific is based on satisfying fundamental curiosity and acquiring knowledge by proving experience. Artistic expresses personal experience and knowledge. Scientific claims objectivity that denies human bias. Artistic claims subjectivity that denies social context. Aims at a universal consensus, laws, stresses individual experience and perception. Scientific process is strongly based on common rules. Artistic process highlights freedom from the known. Scientific process, concepts exposed to professional evaluation. Artistic evaluation of products by colleagues is seldom the case. So that's a little teaser of the table 2 thing. Both in art and science, some sort of creativity process plays a role. The creative process has also been described as a circular process exhibiting a stepwise process that might also fit the artistic modality. The artistic identity, vision, intention, insight, the engineering of the art object, the building or construction of an art object, the exposition and use of artistic product that in its turn contributes to the identity of the artist. Every original idea is imaginative because only imagination can trigger creativity. This is why imagination is just as essential in science and technology as in the arts of our world. The difference between these two pairs of fields is that in science and technology, imagination is largely disciplined rather than free. What motivates science disciplines is the objective truth requirement. Yet Pauli stated, it is more important to have beauty in one's equations than to have them fit experiment. Indicating the appreciation of elegance of mathematical reasoning. Revolutionary art at all times has served this function of preparing for the future. The faculty we use to grasp the nature of the out there is our imagination. Somewhere within the matrix of our brain, we construct a separate reality created by a disembodied thinking consciousness. This is one part of the toroid here. This inner reality is unconnected to the external space and exists outside the stream of linear time. This inner spectral vision amounts to mental opinion, unique to each individual, of how the world works. When an entire civilization reaches a consensus about how the world works, the belief system seems to be elevated to a supreme status of a paradigm. whose premises appear to be so obviously certain that no one has to prove them anymore. However, paradigms intrinsically have a limited lifetime. According to the new physics, the observer and the observed are somehow connected, and the inner domain of subjective thought turns out to be intimately conjoined to the external sphere of objective facts. Through the complementarity of art and physics, these two fields intimately entwine to form a lattice upon which we all can climb a little higher in order to construct our view of reality. Understanding this connection should enhance our appreciation for the vitality of art and deepen our sense of awe before the ideas of modern physics. Thus, art and physics, like wave and particle, can be seen as an integrated duality. They are simply two different but complementary facets of a single description of the world. Integrating art and physics will kindle a more synthesized awareness, which begins in wonder and hopefully ends with wisdom. Mathematics of the torus can be related to art in many ways. One can study art mathematically, looking for symmetries or other relations in a construction of painting or sculpture. Conversely, mathematical algorithms can be used to help create art. Fractal systems, for instance, can recreate realistic shapes of plants, mountains, and clouds, as used in Star Wars for the first time, amongst other things, to make the Dark Planet of Darth Vader. Famously, perspective drawing has a mathematical basis and is a good example of how different the human brain is from a digital computer. Perhaps one reason for this effectiveness of mathematics is that many laws of physics can be expressed in terms of minimizing free energy or minimizing action. That is also an important aspect of torus dynamics. I think I continue in the next lecture. I will do some sort of this will help to explain also why so important development by the Ionian philosophers of nature. And this we took up a lot of times before in our lectures with Heraclitus, but we need to understand what they know then. The physicos, the philosophers of nature, had to go that path. There were no other possibilities. It is necessary, those conclusions are necessary, undebatable, non-argumentative. Because there is no other solution than to see the observer as out of the picture with a Euclidean geometry. Gauss and Riemann, and this is an approximate year, 1855. Things had happened before, but 1855 it really came out into public. This is a date for the first time it is possible to think the observer as part of the process. This is impossible before 1855. Very important to understand. Someone might say, what happened in the East? Well, they never ever had the Ionian physicos development. It never happened in Asia. For good and bad, for bad for their technology, and good maybe in they could keep a holistic view where the observer participates, and I would say the latter is without a doubt, without any serious doubt. It is important to understand that before 1855 nobody could think that the observer was important. Yes, we know it took another 60-70 years before it happened, but it is important to see before this date it is impossible to think it. We are of this world, and only this one can put the subject into the equation and still keep an independent shared world with independent test results. It is not possible in the Euclidean mathematics or geometry. There, by need, the observer has to be outside. Yes, we ask question, where outside? But it doesn't matter. We don't have any options than to hook on to paradoxical, nonsensical things. And I would say, in some ways, by not completely understanding this, also the conclusions of Hugh Everett and Max Tegmark becomes necessary. They need to place the other worlds somewhere else. And this is oddly also the reason for many mathematicians. A staggering 95% place a lot of mathematics outside the world. Only in this more encompassing and discovered, it is discovered. No one could think about this before it was discovered and understood. And then it was a huge process. Need to question Euclidean mathematics that had been a foundation for almost 2000 years. And that wasn't easy, and it was a lot of vehement complaints. People didn't feel happy with that, for good reasons. It's a worldview that disappears, and in the new worldview, wholeness doesn't appear instantaneously. We need to discover the torus. We need to discover the true features of space. So first, the discovery has to be made. Before that, there is no development whatsoever possible. We are of reality. We cannot be intellectually deceitful or dishonest and say, I want the observer to be in on the picture before, because I like the idea that I am part of the universe. Well, until Euclidean mathematics and geometry crashes, you are not. And that is literal, because the subject is in on it. If your understanding is not in the subject, there is no understanding. And there is no change of world. And in a way, you will be only passively participating. You won't even know it. The awareness will not be there. Non-Euclidean mathematics is the precursor of this toroid thing. Came later, it's an expansion, and yet more discoveries that were made. And these ones makes it possible later for Einstein to take his step into general and specific relativity. Would not have been possible without non-Euclidean space. Not. So in the same way, Newton was to some extent right, because Leibniz, Huygens and Berkeley, they used their intuitions. But did they have proof? Did they have access to this? No. Could they make sense of Newtonian mechanics in another way, like the later Julian Barber? No, they could not. This is a very good clue. It's a hint to understand this thing. Without the development within science, with topology, geometry, a further understanding would not have been possible in any human being at all. Except, with a possible exception, you never went to physics. And this is also the reason why Heraclitus took the measures and had his development. Although it landed on deaf ears for good reasons, because it all happened before 1855. And not even then it was possible, because it needed to mature. And there goes also the idea of the Kuhnian paradigm shift, because this is not a paradigm shift. This is something, a turn of knowledge that we didn't know before. And the Kuhnian perspective of paradigm shift put an eerie, out of the world picture that is actually derived of the before Euclidean space. He is a systemic thinker, or was. So he also, like Hugh Everett, Gödel, Max Tegmark, Hawkins, Daniel Dennett, Couples, Churchland, Chalmers, all take a necessary step of placing oneself out of the picture. No longer necessary. We now have the torus. Now we can think in torus, toroidal geometry, and that is very important. It makes the possibility of having an outside world. So it didn't matter how bad classical physics was and all its faults and everything. If we don't have this, we don't have a choice. Sometimes we need to accept paradoxes. And I remember how I encountered the paradoxes of Gödel's theorem when I studied mathematical logic with Dag Westerståhl. Still acting, still working. And this was oddly enough before this. I'm not that old, but that understanding hadn't ventured. So we still went on with a pre-Gödelian understanding. So if we don't have this, we have to swallow a lot of paradoxes, either block them out, or I would say 99% of the cases, simply not understanding them. That is the solution. Or it's not the solution, it happens automatically, because this is not easy to understand. But it will yield if you give it time. Don't attack it head on. It will not yield, because the Euclidean space is so, I would say, it's even engraved in your consciousness. It is the a priori stance you take even before you wake up. It might even be in your dreams. It's the ether, and this is a real ether that is being inside all our thinking, and it should not be seen as a bad thing. This expands it from the inside. Remember what I mentioned Meijer said about the implosion, the explosion. It implodes from the inside. It doesn't remove anything from the other. It adds something that can be understood, but you need to put some effort to it. And it changes all aspects of knowing significantly. And it opens up for a possibility of more knowing. Okay, I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.